I want to first offer my apologies to you all. If you didn't notice, there was an intention to have a PowerPoint this morning, but I think about 3 different people here at the congregation used the PowerPoint, and all 3 of us used different platforms to do that. And our IT guy, my dad, is not here, and me trying to fiddle with it. If you didn't notice, it was flipped upside down, and so that was just a sign for me to just turn it off and proceed without their PowerPoint. But I'm thankful that you're here, and they preached the gospel for thousands of years without a PowerPoint, and we'll be fine without one today. I hope you can follow along and get something out of this lesson. I, like most of you all, and as it's already been mentioned several times this morning, kept my eye on the Hurricane Helene, that was coming in throughout the week, and I believe made landfall in the Tallahassee, Florida area on Thursday night. And just think about, they already know as this storm is coming in that the property damage in these storms is going to be tens of millions of dollars. Unfortunately, I think the last count that I saw that there were about 30 deaths that were associated in Georgia, Florida, Alabama, and all those areas contributed to the storm coming in. But I just happen to also think of how much worse it would be each and every time these large hurricanes come in if the people in the region didn't know beforehand. You know, for days and days and days, they're telling these people where it's going to track most likely, and they encourage them to get out of there as quick as possible. I personally never have been in a hurricane myself, but I've been told by those that have lived in the Gulf in the past that they would actually prefer a hurricane for this reason in compared to a tornado or an earthquake or something, because these large storms are widely traceable and predictable in to where they're going to go. You know, in West Tennessee, we deal with tornadoes most commonly, or flash floods, and there's not a large prediction measure that we can know before these natural disasters happen. In general, everyone appreciates a heads up in life. And while it wasn't the best of news to receive this week, I got an email, for example, this week that said that insurance premiums there at my office were going to go up by about 14% in 2025. That's not good news to know, but the leaders that be decided to share that information with the staff so we can plan accordingly. You know, in our 21st century, the year 2024, just about everybody's cars today are programmed to let us know when we're due for an oil change. We really don't even need the little sticker in the top corner of our windshield, because most of our cars can be programmed to just give us that alert when we need an oil change. Or maybe it is when the tires are low and they need air. We like a heads up in life. And you think, what happens if we don't heed those warnings? If we don't pay attention to the red flags, if you will, that we have? Of course, they're going to be negative consequences most of the times. If we continue to just drive and that oil light stays on our dash and we just ignore it, we're going to end up having engine trouble. That's going to happen. If we have low tires and we just continue to drive around without going to the gas station and airing it up, or we just ignore those warning signs, our tires are going to either blow going down the road, or they're going to wear out quicker than they regularly would. From a Christian point of view, America, on its current trajectory, could be suggested to be sitting in that line of destruction like a hurricane. There are warning signs that we can clearly see if we look at the statistics that a darker day is coming if we do not heed the warning signs. I included a lot of statistics in this lesson today, and I hope they will maybe perhaps perk your ears up a little bit, maybe grab your attention. There was a recent Gallup poll that showed that earlier this year, it was found that only about 21% of American adults attend any religious service on a week-to-week basis. That is a drop from 42% of American adults who said that they attended worship services in the year 2000. That same poll showed that 35% of 18 to 29-year-olds in this country said that they have no religious preference, and only 22 of that same age group attended worship services of any kind on a week-to-week basis. What is the result of this moral decline that we see in our country? Well, in 2022, there were 1.6 million Americans who attempted suicide. We are currently on a trajectory or an average of 135 people commit suicide every day in this country. Suicide is currently the 11th leading cause of death in America. As of September 19th, just a few days ago, there were at least 50 school shootings that have occurred in the United States this year. And in 2023, we broke a record of 82 school shootings in the year 2023. If you average that out, that comes to about one school shooting in our country every 4 to 5 days in the United States. In our country today, there are 13.6 million single-parent households raising over 21 million children. The number of children raised today by a single mother has increased each year since the 1960s, and from 1968 to 2017, that number of children raised in single-parent households more than doubled. So just like that hurricane that came in earlier this week, the warning signs of our continued demise, of our moral decay in our country, are there. Let me assert this morning that those signs, we can know that they are there, and I would say that our moral decline starts with the home. When our home in this country is in trouble, church, our nation in turn is going to become in a great deal of trouble. So this morning I want to spend our time together trying to reason, how can we make a difference for the Lord and for our country in our homes? Firstly, our homes have to have the right foundation. You want to turn in the book of Psalms, chapter 127. The book of Psalms have a plethora of wisdom that we can apply to building godly, sound homes. Psalm 127, verse 1 says, very simply, unless the Lord builds the house, those who build it labor in vain. When God is at the very foundation of our home, that is when we will indeed have a successful home. In the days where we are so consumed with what will end up happening in November in Washington, I invite you to turn over to Genesis chapter 2 and see that the home was the first institution ever to be established on the face of the earth. God saw that this institution, that is the home, to be much more important than any government or any other entity that we have in this lifetime. Genesis chapter 2, among other things, tells us that God created the lands and the animals therein, and Adam proceeded to name each animal. But it was quickly realized and known before time by God that these animals weren't going to be a proper companion to man. So therefore God put Adam into a deep sleep, and he pulled a rib out of Adam, and there he formed a woman. See there in Genesis chapter 2, verse 24, what God's corresponding instruction was to those two and every man and woman to follow. It says, "Therefore, man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh." Notice here this morning that there is no other combination of man and man or woman and woman that is notated as permissible in the eyes of God. Very lovingly this morning, I say, with the statistics that we had just thrown out moments ago, keep in mind also that is the same society that we live in today, that polling shows that 69% of Americans now approve of homosexual marriage. They approve of gay marriage being a valid union. And you talk about statistical increases. If you go back to 1996, only 27% of Americans felt that way. I say these things to say that the state of our home and the things that happen in our home matter. So how did we as a nation get to the point that we are in today? When preparing this lesson, Matthew chapter 19, verse 4 rang out in my mind, and it was when Jesus was speaking to the Pharisees in this instance. He said very simply, "Have you not read?" When we are tasked with the challenge of rearing a family, when we have the challenge of offering guidance to loved ones or the like, I ask you this morning, how often are you and I turning to the Scriptures to see what the Scriptures have to say? In a society where our favorite two words are "I think," how often do we turn to the Scriptures? I recently admitted to a brother here in the congregation that I, like many of you, I struggle with distractions. It's so easy to be reeled away from proper study by either playing video games or watching television shows or the various distractions of this life. According to Forbes, the average American household now has about 20 internet-capable devices in each home. It also said that the average U.S. citizen spends an average of 4.5 hours a day looking at their phone. That averages, if you put it together, a total of about 70 full days out of the year we spend on our cell phones. And even in this day where technological advancement is exceeding at a rapid pace, 2 Timothy 3, verse 16 tells us that all Scripture is breathed out by God and is profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So when the screen seems to dominate today, we still, and it will continue to be this way, the Bible holds great value to our lives. It is very simple, as it said in Timothy there, profitable. Let it be our goal this morning to place God at the forefront of our homes. If you have young children, don't rely on the Bible school teacher to be the main educator for your children in Bible-related matters. If your children are grown and out of the home, I'm still willing to believe that you hold a great deal of influence in their lives. If your children are grown and they're not with you or they're not faithfully attending the services, invite them to worship with you. Or perhaps have courage and sit down and do a Bible study together. Jesus said in Matthew 8:24, "Unless you believe that I am He, you will die in your sins." So therefore, we must make sure that our children possess the knowledge of the teachings of Christ if we ever hope to spend eternity together with Him up there. Not only do our homes need a correct foundation, but they too need the proper focus. Are our fathers and mothers in our homes focusing on spiritual matters not sometimes, but foremost. With very good intentions. And a lot of times when I preach, I'm preaching to myself too. I always want that notation to be there. But very many times we as parents carefully monitor our retirement accounts. We check into our insurance policies. We work extra jobs. We do everything that we can to provide for our children now and into their future well-being in this earth. But I ask you this morning and contemplate to yourself, what are we doing to prepare our children and our grandchildren for eternity? Psalm chapter 127, going back there, it says that children are a heritage from the Lord. Verse 4 says, like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. God has entrusted you to feed and provide for your children and grandchildren, not only physically, but also spiritually. A well-known verse that I know many of us know, Psalm 119, 105 says, your word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. I ask you this morning, are we holding the lamp of guidance for the youth in our lives? We've got to keep the proper focus in our homes. Moms and dads, if we are permitting our children to go to a baseball tournament or to go camping or to sleep over at a friend's house and therefore miss worship services, what message does that send about the priority of God and worship in our lives? Mom and dad, if you don't find the necessary reason to show up to worship services, to show up to Bible classes, what makes you think that your children won't follow suit? Let us make the decision that Joshua made in Joshua 24, verse 15. As for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. Where Joshua was instructing the Israelites at that time to decide whether that they were going to worship the one true God or the God of the Amorites, you have the decision on whether your household will serve the one true God or the ways of the world this morning. The home needs to be built on the right foundation. It needs the proper focus. And thirdly, it must have fearless leaders and parents who are faithful to the Lord. In Acts chapter 4, Peter and John have been arrested by the Sadducees for preaching the resurrection of Jesus. And the next day, it says that the rulers and elders gathered together to interrogate the two apostles. And after seeing their bolden, they came to a conclusion there in verse 13. It said that they had concluded that these two men had been with Jesus. And reading that passage this week, I thought to myself, what better identification could be made about an individual? America today needs homes that are composed of parents that the world would recognize as being with Jesus. How could, if we had this mindset, how could we transform our neighborhoods and our towns and our communities, our country, if just one Christian household at a time allowed God to reign supreme in their home? Perhaps this morning you sit here with a biblical lineage like Timothy did. Paul reflects on Timothy's biblical lineage in 2 Timothy chapter 1, verse 5, saying, I'm reminded of your sincere faith, a faith that dwelt first in your grandmother Lois and your mother Eunice. If that's you this morning, if you come from a long line of faithful parents and grandparents, let me remind you this morning just how truly lucky you are. I challenge you this morning, if that is a comparison to you, I challenge you not to let that biblical bloodline, if you will, stop with your generation or your children's generation. Keep that lineage growing. Maybe you're sitting here this morning and you are a first generation Christian. Let me also say to you what a tremendous blessing you are to the church. Your understanding of the lost and their thought process is beyond valuable to the evangelistic efforts of the church, the way that you are able to relate and see things. I encourage you, if you are a first generation Christian, to start a biblical lineage, a faithful lineage as the patriarch of your family. Perhaps you're sitting here this morning and you don't necessarily fall in either one of those categories. Maybe you are a single person this morning. And to you, I ask, if you are a single person, are you searching for a faithful partner that will help rearing a faithful family along? Are you seeking out a partner that will help you in that goal? No more important question must be asked when searching for a mate. A while back, and this is where my PowerPoint would have been very helpful, but I think you can paint this picture in your mind. A while back, I saw a picture of a completely dark neighborhood. It was an aerial picture of a dark neighborhood, and in the middle of that neighborhood was one lit house. There was one house that was full of light. And that picture really stood out to me. And, up to this point, you may be thinking, well, the overarching tone of this lesson has been quite negative, and that's not been my aim at all this morning. What I want to try to pass on is to live a life that's reflective of that picture. The things that we do in our homes, maybe we don't think about from day to day, but in the big picture, the things that we do in our homes and the priorities that we set, the examples that we set, certainly matter. What we need this morning more than, and I'm going to get back to the picture in a moment, but what we need this morning more than any Democrat or Republican to be elected into office in Washington is for each and every home in this building to serve as that lighthouse in the middle of the dark neighborhood. Each time I travel, recently I went up to Iowa, and each time I travel, I am reminded how fortunate we are in this community, in the surrounding area, to have such a strong church for the Lord. The Lord's church in West Tennessee and this surrounding area, I'm not sure if you know it, but is as strong as it is probably anywhere in the world. And that's a tremendous blessing. There are some people in this country, never mind international communities, but there are some people in this country that if they wish to assemble like you and I are today, that they're looking at a minimum 2.5 hour drive somewhere. And the reason why I decided to give this lesson is, don't think for a minute, those of us that sit here, that our community one day may not become that if we don't do our part in our homes. There could be a society where the little children here have to do something very similar if our country, if our ways do not change. But going back to that picture, if you can picture it in your mind, a dark neighborhood with one light house, I call you this morning to strive to be that lighthouse in a dark neighborhood. Not only are you going to attract others from around you by the way that you're living, you're going to be easily seen as different and attractive to some that possess that good soil. But think about the impact of your children. As they splinter off from your home, eventually, it is our prayer that they will take that light to another dark community. Perhaps it's right down the road. Perhaps it's in a different state. But when we do our parts as parents, as trying to rear our children to be faithful men and women of Christ one day, that they'll take that light with them elsewhere. And that is a biblical principle. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 5, verse 16, "Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who is in heaven." Obviously, this morning, the theme has been centered around the home and the family. And as you leave this morning, I want you to ask yourself, reflect to yourself, where will your children spend eternity? You know, in most instances, where your children will spend eternity most likely will be where you spend eternity. Why do you say that, Blake? Well, you know, have you ever seen here recently on television these 5, 6, 7-year-old children that are just amazing? They're just phenomenal at a certain task, something that's very difficult. Maybe it's playing the piano or the guitar. Recently, I was watching an ESPN series on skateboarding, and maybe not everyone in here is super in tune with skateboarding, but I think most people here know who Tony Hawk is. He's probably the most famous skateboarder in history, really. Well, they were talking about in this series that there are small children out in the West Coast, California area that are 7, 5, 8 years old, young children that are already able to accomplish some of these tricks that Tony Hawk only accomplished at the height of his career. How is that? How can that happen? That Tony Hawk, as a grown man at the height of his career, performs this trick, and then you have a 7-year-old 20 years later that's come and he's just done it with great ease. It's because these children are getting on a skateboard from the time that they're first able to walk and stand, and they're starting to practice. Their parents are encouraging them, practicing with them for hours and upon hours at a time, and through that they become experts at an extremely young age. It's through that persistence and dedication and encouragement that these young people ultimately can accomplish amazing feats. God truly has given us wonderful abilities to do amazing things. Let us each this morning have a goal to cultivate faithful young people in the church. Amazing song leaders, amazing speakers, amazing servants to the church. And a lot of that will, when it comes down to it, be learned from you. They'll be learned from your actions, your examples. And your kids, once again, no matter their age, can still see a pattern of dedication unto Christ. Are they seeing that example, that pattern from you this morning? Do your children know how to become a Christian? Do they know how to faithfully walk through Christ? Are they seeing that example through you? As we close this morning, I think about the church that Christ built. Jesus said, "Upon this rock I will build my church, and the gates of Hades will not prevail against it." Matthew 16:18. And it said that this church was bought by the blood of Christ in Acts 20, verse 28. So if Christ built the church and he purchased the church, whose church does it belong to? Well, it belongs to Christ. I hope it's your endeavor this morning to not want to belong to any other church, but the church that belongs to Christ. Maybe you're wondering this morning, how do you become a member of that church? Well, Peter tells us very simply in Acts 2:38, repent and be baptized, every one of you. And those, it says, those that went on to heed that commandment, in Acts 2, verse 47, he said that the Lord added to the church daily those that were being saved. So we can see the equation of how to belong to that church. I call on you this morning, if you don't belong to that church of the saved, let's study together. Perhaps you already know and you're just waiting to make that move. Let's make that move together this morning. Perhaps you're not walking in accordance to God's will. You've strayed away. We can also pray for you and be with you in that matter as well. If there be any need, you can come forward now as we stand and as we sing.